Very excited to welcome back Kirian Deso von Hest, who has predicted turbulence. He's prophesied doom. And while that seemed hyperbolic a few months ago, the reality has set in, and here we are in just a world of chaos. Welcome back, Deso.
Well, glad to be back. Well, I guess.
Right. If it was all sunshine and rainbows, maybe you wouldn't be back. But we need people like you who've actually foreseen a lot of this craziness, right?
Again, I guess. I wish I was wrong.
Exactly. Because I think you're the only one who thought war was almost, a highly probable outcome of the macroeconomic geopolitical landscape that we've been in. But here we are, man. The war drums are beating. Your fingers on the pulse of this. What do you think is kind of like the end game here?
I'm not so sure there really is an end game. I mean, well, there is a game always, but there is no plan or anything. The decisions being made are highly stupid. The war I thought was going to start first was America and China because China has more need for it. But I suppose the Democrats hate Russia so much that we've basically goaded Putin into war over Ukraine. Just to be clear, I am not on the side of the Russians. Like, I condemn all wars and I would prefer to live in a world of peace. However, you can't stand around a guy with sticks threatening to beat him if he touches you, and then move a step closer and drive him into a corner. And then when he actually hits back, suddenly be surprised. That's just not how it works. Like, it's very clear that Putin has said all this time, the Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. It's just not going to happen. And NATO has had no intention at all to let Ukraine join at any given point. But we could have all stated this up front, and then the war would have just never happened. There would have still been a diplomatic solution. If you're wondering what went wrong, well, it's a diplomatic failure. Because all wars that get started are a diplomatic failure. The diplomats have failed. Now there is war. And it takes two to tango there. Like, now Ukraine themselves are saying that, they would like to join NATO, but we realized we're not going to do it in any sort of short term. NATO themselves is saying that Ukraine's not going to join. Oh, great. Why is there still a war? Well, the point of that is, once the war gets started, there are other reasons to continue it. Hatred builds until at some point it doesn't really matter why it gets started anymore. I mean, if Putin levels 2 or 3 cities now, are the Ukrainians really going to care that they kind of pushed him into this? No, they're just going to hate him for the destruction that he's caused. And if you look online, the extreme escalating sanctions, that's just going to have blowback. That's going to have consequences. I mean, in my heart, I've become chaotically neutral simply because I understand this chaos. I understand where it's coming from. I understand it's normal human behavior at some level. And I'm just sick of it because there's no need. It's all a choice. So I tend to just stay on the level and look at things objectively because there's plenty of emotions flying around. And that's because that's one of the reasons why I basically said, well, there's going to be a war, because the nations, which, typically start wars, and talk about America, America just had a giant need for an external enemy because of the failings with the pandemic and the money printing and the inflation that was going to come. And, well, the lack of supply chains. If you want to know why it becomes more and more likely some massive geopolitical events happen, even though it's not on anyone's radar yet, just look at stacking objectives. So For instance, America messed up with the pandemic, and if America got an external enemy, that would not seem so bad anymore. Well, fine. That's just one reason. But if you can stack on top of that, well, we need to blame somebody for the supply chains. We need to blame somebody for inflation. We need to have a war, but make it look like we didn't start it, because that is never popular. We need to, in America's case, weaken Europe and strengthen America, because Europe is more and more integrating with Asia, the Eurasian continent, and America just can't have that. We need to stop Russian gas. We need to export more American gas, because, Nord Stream 2, and that is an open secret that America wanted Europe to buy its 25% more expensive liquid natural gas compared to the Russian gas. Well, now suddenly that's cheaper. Quelle surprise. And just keep stacking those geopolitical objectives. If you can achieve those objectives with the exact same thing, then that one thing becomes more and more likely to happen, even when there's no lead up. Because I imagine that for a lot of people, this came out of the blue, especially since Putin's had forces on Ukraine's border since like May of last year. Why is now the problem? I mean, even from that perspective, the whole war doesn't make any sense. Putin he's invaded a country that borders him. So effectively, technically, I'm not saying Ukraine is Russia, but the landscape is the same. The climate is the same. And we all know you don't invade Russia in winter. I mean, how many times do we need to learn this lesson? And Putin, a Russian, has basically invaded Russia in winter. That doesn't make any sense. He did it after keeping his troops trained through the summer and the winter months in the field. They must have been very tired even before the invasion began. He sent a very light force, completely unlike Russia, because Russia's an artillery-based army that just flattens everything that comes across. And sure, by now Kharkiv is looking like it's going to be flattened, as well as Mariupol. But it certainly didn't start out that way. They started very uncharacteristically with a quick light assault force, not a blitzkrieg, because that is led by armor and you have a supply column following it with infantry covering the flanks. That's not what happened. It took way too long for the supply columns to get going. They sent out a light force. Maybe they didn't expect resistance. I don't know why, but they certainly didn't start out by trying to flatten Ukraine, In the first 48 hours, you could say that Ukraine's done more damage to itself than Russia, simply because they blew a lot of bridges to stop the Russian advance successfully. And it's commendable, certainly, how ferociously they're defending their homeland. It's certainly a example going forward in history for, how others should look towards defending their homeland. But it all has consequences. Putin's going to get frustrated. He's just going to level cities, because that's what Russians do.
Is it true that they're kind of going to go bankrupt potentially over this? Because isn't it costing billions a day, or no?
No, they're not going to go bankrupt, but they are going to go into bankruptcy. And that's a really weird distinction. Give me a second. So Russia's not broke. That's the big distinction to make here. It's just that currently there is no market. I'm going to weave this into crypto a little bit because it's very interesting. Gazprom went to basically zero. It went to 1 cent. I think I saw it bottom at. Obviously, Gazprom is not worthless because it's a large Russian state company. Russia relies on its revenues. Russia is still selling gas. I mean, Europe started buying more gas when the war came out. So it's not like Russia's not making money. It's simply that the Moscow exchange is closed. And because of the sanctions going back and forth, and by now a lot of them been instituted, nobody wants to touch Russian stocks. And Gazprom is listed in London as well. And the London brokers just don't want to touch it because they might get rolled over in sanctions in the future. Like, who knows? Maybe they lose their license because they traded with Russia and that it's not allowed anymore. And maybe the sanctions will be retroactive. We don't know. A lot of crazy shit is happening right now. It's best not to touch it. So if you look at Gazprom volume, it'll be at zero. It's really weird to see about $200 billion company trade at zero volume, but that's where we are. And the same thing is happening to Russian debt. It's not that Russia can't pay its debt. They have plenty of dollars, but they can't move the dollars because America doesn't want them to move the dollars. So if they have dollar debt and America's blocking every dollar transaction, then how are they going to pay the debt? It's not that they don't want to. It's not that they can't. It's just that they're not allowed to, which honestly, again, is a really unique situation to be in history. And I want to make that clear. No one, not a person out there, has got any experience how to trade this or how to expect this. Or this is historic. Stuff has never gone parabolic like this before, on the upside and the downside. Like what happened to nickel. Go look at the chart. Never happened before. What's going to happen to all the other commodities? Never happened before. And we should talk about nickel too, because it all interweaves. Obviously, Russia is a very large nickel producer, and that created suddenly a shortage in the nickel market, which caused a giant short position by a very large Chinese steel manufacturer to blow up, which caused the nickel price to go parabolic, which caused the LME to not just stop trades, but to reverse a day worth of trades, more than 5,000 trades, all of them canceled and reversed. Very large players like the LME. That's not a speculative market. That is where people go to buy materials they need in industry. And sure, people made money here, and you can question how ethical that is. But the point of the fact is, it was legitimate. At the time it happened, it was legitimate. And the short should have just blown up. Problem is, that can't happen because the LME probably would have blown up and gone bankrupt. And then all these paper scams would have blown up. And suddenly, copper would have been like 5 times as much. Gold, silver, 10 times as much. Aluminium, palladium, platinum, all these other things that are traded in papers, far more than they're traded in physical. All of them would have blown up. And then the system freezes. We are this close to total Armageddon. That's why the LME just reversed it with a snap of the fingers. But you can't do that without consequences. And the consequences of this is that nobody is going to trust the LME anymore. You might win big today, but they might just reverse it tomorrow. And this was a massive event, so everybody took notice. But what's to say that in copper, if it goes up a couple bucks, but the market doesn't crash, but you won big, and now you want to close your trade, and they say, you know what? We don't really feel like it. Here's your old price. I can't say that's not going to happen anymore. Can you? No, not a person out there is capable of saying that anymore. And the LME did it to themselves. And why? Because if they didn't do it, they would have died that day. And that goes back to what I've said before. Why are people in positions doing all of this? Why are they lying so much? Why are they cheating, supporting fraud? This is just one more day outside of the noose. The LME decided to burn all of its credibility, all of its reputation, 144 years of trading. All of it gone. Why? Because all of it would have been gone anyway. Only now, maybe they'll still be around on Monday. That's the difference. That's why we're so close to Armageddon.
Okay, so for that close to Armageddon, I'd love to get your thought on what Armageddon looks like and what investors and people can expect if that tips over into that crazy scenario you're talking about. What does that look like?
That's not going to be hard. You're just going to see multiple commodities, and I've got no idea how many do the same thing as nickel did. That's it. I mean, it's a simple question of how much money is out there versus how much of that money is located in commodities. Now, if you've been following me or heard me before, you've probably heard me talk about location of capital before. And that is because it is extremely important. You never hear any of the economists talk about it. And that's because they just don't know, or well, they just don't think about it. And location of capital simply means I have my money, you have your money, I can't spend yours, you cannot spend mine. So if you and a bunch of others are trading in the market and the amount of money you put into that market is the liquidity of that market, that doesn't include my money. My money isn't measured in any of that metrics. So if you and your friends have got $1 million between you all and you're trading that market based on that $1 million worth of liquidity, and I've got 10 million and I suddenly decide to jump into that market, well, now there's $11 million worth of liquidity. The price is going to 10x overnight. Simply put, the amount of liquidity, the pile of money chasing that object blew up. And when you think about $1.5 trillion in reverse repos still out there, and you think about the uranium market being, even with all the rises recently, about 40 billion in size. There's just that much money out there. They printed that much money. What we're getting is 1970s style inflation. And what the 1970s style inflation means is not the oil shocks. That is 1980s style inflation. The 1970s style inflation came from the US government printing far too much money, the gold being drained, having to go off the gold standard because the leverage ratio of how much gold was backing how much paper was getting too much. So they just took away the gold. And now the amount of money they actually printed, well, they had to find value. How much value is it really there? It's just a question of how much is it worth? Well, how much of it is there out there? And then it starts flowing around. It flew into gold, and well, the gold price went up to like $540 from 35. And then it became legal to trade gold again and own gold again for Americans. Notice how there was a 5-year lag between that. And if you go look at the chart, there was a lot of a lot of gains made in the time it was illegal. And then it became legal, dropped to $200 per ounce. And that's when the oil shocks hit, and that's when we got the 1980s all-time high of gold. And what we're getting now is everything combined. So we're first getting that's why the CPI is already blown out long before any talk of war by anybody else. That is the 70s style inflation. We simply printed too much money. It started chasing commodities. Commodities went up in price. That was charged more to the consumer. Now the consumer needs to spend more money. Inflation goes up. The consumer needs to start chasing more money. So wages go up as well. But, it's a cycle. It's an inflation cycle. So that's what we're getting on the one hand, a runaway 1970 style inflation cycle that can only be stopped by rates at 20%, which is never going to happen. And we're getting an oil shock on top of that because of the 1980s inflation, because of what's happening with Russia, and that Russian supplies are basically now persona non grata, meaning nobody wants to touch any of it, regardless how much we need it. And the whole propaganda of stand with Ukraine isn't helping, because now the general public is openly demanding that we stop using Russian oil and gas. We simply cannot do that. Not at less than $300 a barrel oil. It's impossible. The supplies are not out there. It takes time to build up mines.
That's why I was into commodities. That's why you've called this to a T. You said eventually the big money is going to come out of the stock market and start chasing commodities. And we have these massive melt ups in commodities, and it's a vicious cycle, which is what we're in right now.
Oh, it's even crazier. Remember that just 3 months ago, less than 3 months ago, in the video that we did, how I compared oil to bread. And I said, well, if oil goes up $10 a barrel, but you can buy 10 less breads than before, have you really made money? Well, if you compared the wheat price to oil lately, wheat price has gone parabolic. Oil hasn't yet. Technically, you're now buying less bread per barrel of oil than before. Less than 3 months after I said it. Look, the war, as far as predictions goes, has moved up the curve yet again, much like COVID has. So all the inflation that we have now, we were gonna have anyway, but it might have took 2 to 3 years longer if we got a second repo crisis instead of a COVID crisis. And the reason COVID moved everything up faster in financial terms is because it was a real world crisis that could not be printed away. It did not have a financial origin. So it didn't matter how much money we threw at it. It was just going to run its course. And now that we're 2 years later, it has run its course. It's still going on, by the way, because it's just come out like 2 to 3 hours ago that China's locked down Shenzhen because of COVID. The entire city's on lockdown. That's the 4th largest port in the world. So the supply chain just got another kick in the balls just hours ago. So the news is still coming out on an hourly basis. And look, the leaders are just not going to react in time. I'm just going to go and say it. You're never going to hear that you should protect yourself, or that the time already came and went that you should have protected yourself. You should have already been protected by now. But they're never going to tell you that. Yellen recently said that it's all transitory again. Like everything will fix itself. How? They never said how. Like they can quote some basic economic rules outside of context. Like, well, if the prices go up, supply will come online. No, not if the parts require nickel and there's no nickel. Like we're going to all switch to EVs. No, not if EVs use just about as much nickel as they use lithium, and the nickel prices went parabolic. I saw a chart come by saying that comparing the material cost of just lithium, nickel, and cobalt in a Model 3 Tesla in 2020 and what it is now. And I thought the cost in 2020 was something like $1,500 for, about 150 kilograms of materials in total. Specialist materials, and now that's 7,500, 5x. Wow. And that's just the start, because the Chinese short in the nickel market doesn't want to close a short, doesn't mean the material that we need in industry is there. And nickel is mostly used in steel. It's used in other stuff as well, but I believe it was said that 60% of the steel price, stainless steel, is the nickel added to it. And now we just don't have any nickel anymore. Ergo, we're not going to have steel anymore. I mean, the material is still out there. It's not like all the business is closed somehow. It's just that it can't move to where it needs to go. We've basically, somebody said they love the term, so I'll use it again. We're going to get a hard Brexit between two economies. On the one hand, the Chinese-Russian economy, and on the other hand, the Western US-centered economy and Europe. It's basically literally going to be a hard Brexit. We're just going to stop trading.
Well, that's what I really, really, really am interested in, because it's so important. There's so many implications. So what is stopping China from seeing the weakness in the West, right? The inflation, seeing the weakness and saying, look, we're going to ally up with Russia. Maybe we'll invade Taiwan and we'll bring India with us and create an Eastern axis that is powerful. What is stopping them from doing that?
What do you mean stopping? They're actively working towards it. I mean, India's setting up a rupee/ruble exchange mechanism so they can continue to trade with Russia. It's understandable. India has a closer history with the USSR than they do with the West, British colonialism and all of that. So you don't have to count on India being on quote unquote our side. And China and India together is already like a third of the population of the planet. There's lots of consumption there, which Russia can just feed. So it's not that they're going to have a good time. No one is going to have a good time here. But the way I look at it is that Russia's already poor. Basically, sure, there's Western style wages, but it's only Moscow and St. Petersburg. I have a very dear friend who is Russian, who lives in the middle of nowhere. It's still in a region capital, and his average salary in his city before everything started was about 375 euros a month, so $400 a month. And that's because he's living in a regional capital in the middle of nowhere. The villages around there, it's half. They don't own anything. The sanctions are not going to hurt those people very much because they all have small gardens, because if they didn't, they would already starve. So the reason why I'm so worried is because Russia's going to go from a third world country to a third world country. But we are going to go from first world countries to third world countries because of the resources that we are now no longer consuming, or we need to consume, but we're refusing to, like oil and nickel and basic stuff. Like you want to ban Russian vodka, go ahead. That's not going to hurt the global economy anything. But for example, people in America are pouring out Russian vodka, even though that vodka was produced not in Russia, because a lot of the popular brands aren't actually Russian. So who are you hurting here? It's like, fuck you, Russia. God damn, I'll get you. Like, what? And then you got Nancy Pelosi saying on national TV, no. Government spending doesn't increase the deficit. It reduces it. It reduces inflation.
Yeah. Man.
Now, obviously, the news isn't going to report on any of that because these people are in charge of the country that spends 10 times as much on the military as Russia does. And that's not a comfortable thought. But it is what it is. And that's why we're just inching close to the apocalypse, because it doesn't matter what you and I think or you and I know. Even though I could clearly run the country better than anybody else, I'm just not ever going to be in a position to be able to. Nor is anybody else competent. Because if anybody else competent gets anywhere close to power now, they're going to immediately see how incompetent these fools are, and they're going to eject them from power. They don't want that, so they're just blatantly lying and doing stupid stuff, like starting wars. Honestly, right. when you hear what comes out of the mouth of Biden and Pelosi, and then they say that, no, this is Putin's fault, NATO has nothing to do with it, I just can't believe them.
Right.
No, they lie. They lie so easily. And that's also a big problem here, and that is that the trust is evaporating at an extremely quickly pace. And that was what I was referring to with the LME as well. Nobody trusts the LME anymore, with good reason. It's not. The problem isn't that nobody trusts anyone anymore. The problem is that nobody trusts anyone anymore with good reason. You shouldn't trust these assholes. But the problem is we need to vote in somebody else. Who are we going to vote in?
Yeah, well, the biggest concern I have is because other people, I have another interview coming out, very convincing that we do have 1970s style inflation. We're going to have commodities go out of control to the upside, but then we're going to have stocks go down to the downside. The baby boomers are the biggest generation in American history. They're all trying to retire on their big fat 401ks. They cannot afford a 20% drawdown. That causes chaos. What is your take on the impacts of crashing stock markets in terms of politics, populism? What? It's crazy.
Well, yeah, stocks might go down, but in the end, the commodities need to be produced. And the commodities that are going up in price just will be able to sell for more, whether the market agrees with it or not. If the market thinks, or I don't know what the market thinks, if the price just goes down while you know there's going to be a shortage, just buy. The market is wrong. Here's the thing, Elliot. It's the best kept secret in finance. The market can very much be wrong. The market is wrong all the
Absolutely.
fucking time.
You're always wrong. Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to early stage invest because everything that has a lot of value immediately goes up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Look at platinum. Just go look at platinum companies. It doesn't really matter what. Just pick majors. Pick majors because it's just a lot easier to analyze. Go look at the revenues of platinum majors, and then go look at the platinum price. And it doesn't make any sense. These majors are printing money, maybe almost just as fast as the Federal Reserve is, simply because, well, for instance, a lot of platinum mining takes place in South Africa. And because of the troubles and everything and socioeconomic collapse, labor just got cheaper. So they get more, and ICE cars and emissions and all of that. With the car market going vertical, more cars have been sold, so more cars need to be produced, which require more platinum. So the platinum is required more. The companies are making bank, but they haven't gone up. If you look at the share price over last year, or last 2 years, I should say, or maybe even 3 or 5 years, it's not comparable to the amount of money that they're printing. It's not comparable to the health of these companies compared to the value of other companies, which just don't have that kind of health. Like highly speculative electric vehicle plays, for instance. Why is Nikola still worth anything? Anything at all? Like, let's look at. I think Rivian just dropped in post-market or pre-market because of whatever cars they couldn't deliver. But let's look at Nikola. Now, we know it's a scam. For the people who don't remember or haven't heard about it, that was the company that had its electric truck roll down a hill, and that was how they staged it working. They never had a working product. And here it says the market cap is still 3.14 billion.
I know. Absurd valuations still in all these.
Yeah. And that is after it's dropped from at least by half.
Yeah.
So let's see here. What was the maximum price of Nikola? Look, at some point it was $66. It's now 7.5 per share. And now it's the market. Well, let's say the market cap was about 9 times as big. And you get around $25 billion. Yamana, which is one of my favorite gold majors, is even at these prices printing money. The gold price has gone up, so they're making more. And they have a market cap of 5.3 billion. So we have, on the one hand, a market cap of 5.3 billion, producing 1.82 billion in revenue. On the other hand, we have Nikola, which has a market cap of 3.14 billion. So more than half of Yamana. It used to be a multiple of 6 or 7 of Yamana. They never made any revenue. Just none. None at all. They're never going to either, I think. So why not move the money that's in Nikola into Yamana? That's why I say we're going to get an asymmetrical crash, because once people realize that these kind of inefficiencies have gotten so unimaginably big, there's just no stopping it anymore. Like, sure, right now everyone's still in doubt, but what if the gold price has gone up 5 times and Apple has gone down 5 times? Which, again, I'll look it up live. Apple has a market cap of, drum roll, market cap of 2.5 trillion.
I know. I can't deal with these market caps. They're too big.
Yeah, 2.5 trillion. So we, let's see, divided by 5, that is 500 billion. Like, so you can divide it by 5, you get 500 billion, and that is 12 and a half times the entire uranium sector. Still, what have we done? What have we done?
Exactly. Yeah. No, but that's yeah, asymmetric trade. But that's exactly what happened in the 70s. Crashing stocks, pumping commodities. So here we are again. I can't believe it's repeating itself, even though
Well, again, I want to interject. This is going to be nothing like the 70s, simply because of the numbers being so much bigger, and this size, the size of the discrepancy between how much money is located in one place and how many other places it can flow to it's nothing like the 70s at all. It's nothing like the 80s at all. This has never happened in history before. Again, if Warren Buffett takes 33% of his cash position, the uranium market doubles. All stocks doubles. But it also means that probably the fuel price for uranium will goes up, which means that the electricity production costs of nuclear plants goes up. Now, luckily for nuclear plants, the fuel cost is very low compared to the overall running costs. So that's why I'm investing in the uranium bull market, because there it doesn't matter. Those numbers can go up very high before they become a problem. But the same is true for oil or gas. And that becomes a problem much quicker because oil is the input for everything. And we saw how quickly that went up with the invasion. So once the supply of oil goes down further, and again, you just take half of the market cap of Apple, only now it doesn't chase the uranium market, now it chases oil. That's a trillion and a quarter just looking for oil, wanting to buy oil. It's going to find oil. The problem is that you and me need oil too, and we are not going to find oil if the trillion and a half looks for it and then just stores it and doesn't sell it.
Right. So a big question here, because investors are looking at this. I think a lot of people are starting to agree with what you're saying, but then it's like, is physical metal kind of like a better allocation of capital?
Yes.
It's a risk off completely trade, insurance against the whole system collapsing, compared to like an oil stock that trades on the New York Stock Exchange.
I said it at the start of the year, didn't I, in our last video? Like, now is the time to minimize risk. The people who will walk away from this the best are the people who kept the most. There's two ways to make money in the market. One is during a bull market, and then you become rich by earning more than the other guy. But the second way is in a bear market, and you become rich by losing less than the other guy. Because rich is relative. It's completely relative. If I have $10, you have one, I'm rich compared to you. Even though, in absolute terms, it's nothing. Not when there's trillions floating out there. So I really believe that now is the time to go full prepper, full apocalyptics. The time has already happened, because anybody who buys my position in silver now has to do it at $10 an ounce more than I did.
Exactly.
So the time's already come and gone, but it's not too late. There's a difference between being first, being last, and being left out. Anybody going into physical metals now, storing it physically, keeping it locally, and if you have a lot of it to the point where you need to have a professional vault, find a private company that guarantees that whatever's in the vault at all times is yours, legally and financially. So bank security deposits or bank security boxes get counted on the balance sheet of the bank. So if the bank goes bankrupt, they will just confiscate whatever's in the box, give you the insurance value, and that's that. But if money is being devalued and it's physical silver that you want, you had it in your vault. The bank takes it and gives you cash, which you then need to use to look for silver, which is no longer obtainable because the price is going parabolic. Then you're fucked. So that's why my system is I have a small safe in my home. First off, that's your first layer of security. Never tell anybody you have something in your home. But I want to set an example on how you have to go through the entire system. So I have to say it, but that's just disclaimer. So first off, tell nobody you have anything. Second off, get a personal safe. That is your tier 1 system. Small safe, but heavy. So it's, hard to move around. Bolt it to the floor like I have, and keep a little bit of emergency cash in your home. That is the old school way of doing things. Don't think you can immediately access your money in the bank. Because, banks used to be closed during the weekends. Well, how are you going to spend money if you need money in the weekends? Well, you need to keep it somewhere. How are you going to keep it? Well, you need to keep it in your home because that's where you are. But how are you going to do that safely? Well, you buy a small safe, which is designed to not make it worth it for thieves to get into, because it makes a lot of noise. It's a lot of effort, and the safe is so small that there can never be more than like 5,000 worth of value in there. And why would you try and crack a safe and pull that much attention to yourself, especially in an apartment building or something? Because if you start making noise, people call the cops. Why would you do that instead of just walking inside a living room, picking up the computer and selling it for like 1,000 or 500? Like 2-minute job, in and out. Nobody knows that. Nobody heard anything. Or you want to go ahead with a crowbar and like a fucking drill and go ahead against the safe that's got anti-drill plates. It's going to take you at least an hour to get through the first layer. It's going to be loud. So that's the first layer of the system. And then the majority of my silver and gold, the vast majority, is in a private safe with a private company that has guaranteed that whatever's in that safe, and they don't even know what's in the safe, that is mine. I basically had to give a generalized description of what's in the safe for insurance reasons. So I said some cash, some documents, some precious metals, and say, all right, that's fine, that's enough. We don't want to know more. I asked them tough questions, including that you cannot invest in this company because it's a privately owned company by a family who's put all their shares into a nonprofit trust, which then pays them a dividend from the shares or the profits or whatever they've got set up. So there cannot be a hostile takeover. Nobody else can buy this company, then change the rules, then confiscate what's in my box. Because they first need to buy the company, and because it's in a foundation, all the shares, it's not trading on the open market, nobody can buy it. Even the people who started this company cannot touch the shares anymore.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much. We got to talk more. There's so much more to discuss in this environment, but where can people go to find you in the meantime?
You can find me on Twitter at Deso Games. You can find me on Twitch at Deso Games. I have a website, desogames.com, which is, outdated, but I'll update in the future. But more active stuff articles comes out at desogames.substack.com. I have a Substack, which is also Deso Games. And that's about it.
This discussion is for informational purposes only. Please consult a certified financial planner when making any decisions about investing. And do your own research before making any decisions. Investments are risky, and you can lose lots of money in them.